Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the post-game pod from the Timberwolves Game 2 dismantling of the Denver Nuggets. An insane defensive performance, once again, holding the defending champs to 80 points in a regulation NBA basketball game. We're going to break the whole thing down. We'll talk about the Wolves' balanced offense. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I don't know that there's been a happier Tuesday in Timberwolves fandom history. The Wolves completely and utterly destroyed the Denver Nuggets on Monday night in Game 2 of the second round series. And man, we're going to talk some defense today. We're going to talk who stood out defensively for Minnesota. A Rudy Gobert-less performance, by the way. Congrats to Rudy and his family for the birth of his first child, apparently early on Monday. Wasn't able to make it to Denver, apparently due to weather. And the Wolves held it down. They did it. They did it without Rudy Gobert. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Lots to get to here today. Another strong Anthony Edwards performance. He's not the headline because the defense was so stifling, but another really good game from Ant too. So a lot to get to. A big thank you here off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right. Man, so the Wolves held the Nuggets to 80 points in this game. They've held them below 100 in both games so far in the playoffs. I've watched, I've read, watched in the past, just since the game ended, so not a long period of time. People try to quantify just how dominant this defensive performance was by Minnesota. And I don't think it's hyperbole to discuss it as one of the best defensive performances in recent memory. And this is, and I've been saying this on the show now, going back to All-Star break-ish, if not earlier. Like, this team was on pace. Remember back in January, February, I started doing this every couple of weeks. I'd kind of update where the Wolves defense was compared to the number 2 defense in the regular season, like number 2 defense in the league, what that gap was. And I've still got my notes sitting here from earlier this year. There were only, see if I can decipher what I had written from back then. There were only 3 teams besides this Timberwolves team in the past 20 years that had a point differential greater than the second best team in the regular season of over 2 points. And only one team had a better mark, and that was the Spurs of 2015-16, were 3.1 points per 100 possessions better than the second best defensive team. The Wolves were 2.9 points better than the next best defensive team, according to Clean the Glass. This was a generational defense in the regular season, and it did not get enough attention for being just that. And now we're starting to see the NBA community more broadly, the national pundits, etc., realizing just how good this defense was. Now, I watched every single Wolves game this year, and this is it was the best defensive half the Wolves have played, and it was without Rudy Gobert. By the way, side note, I'm not going to spend any more oxygen on this. I saw some snide remarks on, of course, because there always are on Twitter about, is Rudy holding this defense? Obviously, that's absurd. I'm not even going to finish the sentence. You know what I was about to say. It's absurd. Rudy's the defensive player of the year for a reason. Imagine, a better way to look at this is, imagine if Rudy had played and they had the same motivation. Does Denver break 70? Seriously, I'm dead serious. So all that to say, the point here is this is already a generationally good Wolves defense. Like the Warriors from a few years ago, obviously the Pistons teams from the mid-aughts Was it the 04 team, I guess, that went to the finals the year the Wolves went to the conference finals in the West? A couple other teams mixed in there. But, I mean, now already going back to 04 Pistons, that's 20 years, right? Like, maybe one of those Spurs teams. So, like, we're talking certainly top 4 defense in the last 20 years. That's what we're talking about. And they just absolutely dominated the defending champions, a really good offensive team at full strength. I know Jamal Murray's banged up. I get it. But a team with everyone on the floor, and they dismantled them. Denver scored 20 points or less in 3 of the 4 quarters in this game. Jokic and Murray at halftime, Murray didn't crack double digits for the game. He had 8 points at 18 shots in this game. Jokic, you kind of could have forgotten he was on the floor at some point, middle of the game. He was completely ineffective. Had a couple of nice passes mixed in there. I mean, there's nothing. The worst thing that could have happened. Well, I don't know. The worst thing. Things obviously didn't turn out well for Denver anyway. But remember, Aaron Gordon made his first 5 shots. He was like, why Denver was still hanging around in this game at the end of the first quarter. And the Wolves were like, okay, we're not going to stray from our game plan. This dude's not going to keep making shots. And sure enough, Aaron Gordon, he actually ended up leading them in scoring. But he started 5 of 5, and then he was 3 for his next 9 and missed his last 2 3-point attempts. The Wolves were like, all right, that's cool if you want to keep doing that. He was second on the Nuggets in field goal attempts. It's exactly what Minnesota wants. There was a clip from earlier this year. I think it was the first time they played Denver. And remember, Mike Nori on Bally Sports North does the pregame whiteboard breakdown, and he talked about the Nuggets. I forget what it was. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I don't know, basically 500 when Aaron Gordon shoots 6 or more shots or 7 or more shots, something like that. He shot 14 shots in this game, and Denver scored 80 points. The perimeter defense for Minnesota was otherworldly. And the other thing is they did this without Rudy. They did it with Jaden McDaniels in foul trouble basically the whole night. McDaniels only played 26 minutes. This was a clinic from Nickeil Alexander-Walker, a bit of a throwback game defensively for Mike Conley, a really strong defensive game from both Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns. Kyle Anderson was very good in this game, pressed into the starting lineup for Minnesota. I don't know how else to put it. It really legitimately is like coaching tape. If you're trying to show a high school basketball team how to play defense. And I don't know that I've ever had that thought watching an NBA basketball game. I shouldn't say ever, but very frequently at all. Everybody on the Wolves was on a string, guarding on the perimeter. And it goes from picking these guys up 90 feet down the floor, basically 94 feet down the floor. Alexander Walker on Jamal Murray was the most fun because TNT showed the clip of them at midcourt and him laughing while he's guarding Jamal Murray. It's legitimately the exact. I said this on Twitter. It's the same feeling that I had early in the Phoenix series where the Wolves are pressed up, playing full court defense, and the Nuggets guys have a look on their face like, "Why are you trying so hard? It's not cool to try so hard." Well, guess what? It's the playoffs, so yeah, you're supposed to try hard. That's the look that Devin Booker had on his face for the majority of that Phoenix series. That's the look Jamal Murray has on his face. Reggie Jackson. These dudes, every time they were being touched, they were reacting like they were trying to draw a foul. And I actually thought, hey, Denver ended up shooting more free throws than Minnesota. And Wolves fans have been on the other side of this, right? In the past, when the Wolves were not physical, go back 2 years, that playoff team that lost to Memphis in the first round, the Wolves were not physical enough, and we're getting upset with the whistle. You have to be the aggressor. And I don't think, other than maybe a couple of plays actually late in the game, I don't think the Wolves were getting a favorable whistle. If you go back and watch those defensive possessions that are circulating, like the one where the Wolves trapped Jamal Murray, where Alexander Walker McDaniels trapped him, the possession ends with, I think, the Nuggets hitting the side of the backboard as the shot clock expired on a corner 3 attempt from the left side of the floor. There was no fouls on that possession. It was 100% clean defense. And Jamal Murray was, swaying back and forth, trying to act as though he was being contacted, but he was creating all of that to try and create space for himself and hopefully generate a whistle. Timberwolves can be physical, can be handsy, but that's the bet, right? You play that way. The officials aren't going to call everything. And the vast majority of what the Wolves were doing was clean. The physicality was absolutely perfect. The defensive rotations were perfect. Again, the Wolves were on a string. They were stunting and recovering. They can switch those Gordon Murray pick and rolls at the top of the floor, the top of the circle. They were switching on Jokic, like they were switching and getting back to their own very quickly. The rotations, when they would double on the catch with Jokic every now and again, they would still get back and recover and even get decent contests on otherwise semi-open corner threes. And those are the possessions to me that make the difference in the margins. Obviously, the deflections, the fast break opportunities the other way, the turnovers, those are huge. But some of those corner three-point attempts that against any other defense, they end up being mostly open three-point attempts and like good work by the offense to even get the ball to the corner for an open three. But the Wolves are still getting decent contests on these shots and bothering the Nuggets just enough that it makes up the difference. Now, the margins didn't matter in this game because the Wolves won by 20 plus, and they led by 20 plus for the majority of the game. But they will make up the margins over the course of a series. Just getting decent rear view contests or side contests, or just even late closeouts on guys, that matters. It chips away. It impacts guys when they're shooting the basketball. Just that motion as they're getting ready to shoot. Like the Wolves did such a good job with that stuff. And those are the like minor things to me that aren't super noticeable. They're not as sexy as the steal, the ripping the ball away as Alexander Walker or Conley each did a couple of times that led to dunks and 3-pointers on the other end. But they're effective and they add up when they influence the other team shooting a high percentage, otherwise open corner 3-point attempt. All right. A couple more things to get to about really the Wolves defense. I also want to talk Ant, and then we'll get into individual studs and duds. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at BetterHelp. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week, and that is, talked about this a little bit already, still Rudy Gobert catching strays for a couple of reasons. First of all, dude's with his family. Like, let him be there for the birth of his first kid. I'm not talking about Wolves fans at all, obviously. The second thing is, just because the Wolves had a great game without him doesn't mean that he drags them down in any way, shape, or form, right? It doesn't prove that at all. And if they hadn't played well, then it would have been like, there would have been some other reason why it didn't, Rudy wouldn't have impacted the game in any way. Rudy Gobert is an incredible player, and he is the linchpin of this defense. And Chris Finch talked about this post game. He helped change. He was the reason for the defensive culture change in Minnesota. And, needs to be credited even when he's not there for helping change that culture. And the Timberwolves knew they had to play that much harder because Rudy was not there. Rudy Gobert is the best overall defensive player in the league and the most impactful defensive player in the league. And he's going to win his 4th Defensive Player of the Year award. And there's a reason for that. Look, therapy looks different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than, the Rudy Gobert problem that I just mentioned. But hey, it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while. And like I said, therapy looks different for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so just a couple more things about the defense. I mentioned, obviously, no Gobert. McDaniels in foul trouble, only ends up playing 26 minutes in this game. Alexander Walker, to me, was the most impressive defensive player. I didn't mention Naz Reid's defense yet. He was great. That possession where he blocked Nikola Jokic twice and then impacted a missed hook shot on the last attempt. Nas had 4 blocks in this game. The one on Murray was awesome when he stood over him and growled at him after the shot block. Like, Nas was awesome. There was no weak link defensively for Minnesota. The rotations were so crisp, and I said this before, but it's legit a teaching tape on how to play team defense and also individual defense, and how to trust your teammates, right? If everybody as part of that defensive unit is going to play in a string, know their rotation, know who's stepping up where, it's really unstoppable when you have the length and the athleticism that the Wolves have, right? I mean, Mike Conley and Monte Morris are the only guys that are quote unquote undersized in the rotation. And otherwise, like, it was complete and utter dominance for Minnesota. It really was. There's no other way to put it. On the other side of the ball, I thought the Wolves' decision-making was really good on offense. There were some sloppy turnovers. It was more of an issue in the second half. The Wolves ended up with 12, and Ant had 4 of them, but a couple of them were just really silly late in the game. There was one he just dribbled out of bounds after, I think it was third quarter, when Conley and Ant had a 2-on-1, and their spacing wasn't good, and Conley tried to throw it to Ant late, and Ant pulled it out, and he dribbled it out of bounds. So a couple of them were silly. Ant was still really good. And I said this earlier, he's not the headline here because the Nuggets scored 80 points. But Ant had 27 on 17 shots, and he only made 1 3. He had 7 assists. He had a couple of steals, only a couple of rebounds in this game. But it was a strong Anthony Edwards game. I thought it reminded me of what was that game 2 against Phoenix. I know he scored less in that game, but the decision-making was on point. There were a couple times he could have forced a tough shot, like he did late in the shot clock. The one, obviously, that was the most Kobe or MJ-esque shot that everyone, it's going around all the highlights, as it should. It was crazy over a double team over Aaron Gordon, and I think it was either Murray or KCP on the left side. That was a late shot clock attempt. Like, that made sense, right? Your best shot at a good shot there is Ant doing that. There were a couple others where he was kind of getting into the paint, and there were 2 guys on him, and he could have done the same thing, but instead kicked it to a teammate, and the Wolves ended up getting a better look. So I thought the decision-making from Ant was really strong in this game. And even though the 27 and 7 and the 4 turnovers aren't as eye-popping as the 43 the other night, this was a strong game for Anthony Edwards. I thought the rotation for Minnesota with no Rudy Gobert, Kyle Anderson started, and then McDaniel's in foul trouble. The Wolves just played a lot more Nas and a lot more Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Monte Morris was still the 8th guy in the rotation, or I guess in this case the 8th guy. It was the 9th guy when Rudy was available, and only played slight minutes, and apparently hurt his finger. TNT reported toward the end of the game he was out with a finger sprain, but he was probably the worst player on the floor for Minnesota in this game, but I thought he held his own. Monte Morris did. He was actually the only player with the negative plus minus. But Wolves bench, both Nas and Nickeil Alexander-Walker were great. Very impressive. And as I mentioned, offensively, it wasn't, not just Ant making those good decisions. We'll talk more about Cat when I get to studs and duds, but all those decisions were really good. Denver in this game out-rebounded Minnesota by 8. Denver had 18 offensive rebounds in this game. Part of that was playing volleyball near the rim and getting denied at the rim. Both Jokic and Aaron Gordon did that, and they actually had 9 of Denver's 18 offensive rebounds between the 2 of them. So Minnesota lost the boards, but that's kind of it. The Wolves actually did shoot 3 more threes and made 4 more threes than Denver, which was nice to see. They shot 4 less free throws than them, and actually the Wolves were only 9 of 14 at the line. They obviously won the turnover battle. They won the block shots battle. The big one for me, Minnesota beat Denver on points in the paint 52-34. They beat them by 18 points with no Rudy Gobert. And it's not like Ant was living in the paint in this game. He had a couple of nice moves, and he did get fouled a couple of times. But this was a lot of, Slow-Mo had a putback in transition. Slow-Mo, by the way, had 7 offensive rebounds in this game. A really, really clutch. He's not going to be in studs and duds. So let me talk about Slow-Mo real quick here. He had 6 points, 9 rebounds. 7 of his 9 rebounds were offensive rebounds. He had 8 assists and only 2 turnovers, 2 steals and a block, 3 of 8 shooting. And it was just kind of like early third quarter, Denver goaded him into a couple of shots. Actually, it was a late second quarter, I think, when Denver was trying to make a little bit of a push, but couldn't. I don't know. I mean, Slow-Mo was really good in this game. He was really effective. He was physical enough defensively. I thought played a really, really strong game. So anyway, rebounding wise, The Wolves dominated points in the paint, but they lost the rebound game. And that's mostly because Denver was sub 35% from the field. There were a lot of offensive rebounds available for Denver. So percentage-wise, that number is less impressive than the volume of 18 rebounds if you really look at the percentage, because they missed so many shots. There's more opportunities. But that was one of my things to watch for the series was offensive rebounding for Denver, and they had 18 in this game. So that's something to keep an eye on. Again, no Rudy Gobert makes a big difference there, but the Wolves still won points in the paint by 18 because they bothered Joker so much in the paint. They bothered Gordon when he got into the paint. Murray did not want any of the smoke when he got anywhere near the paint. He shot 3 of 18 in this game, and of course, not many of those were actual paint attempts because he doesn't want to get in there. But very impressive performance in the paint for Minnesota. I want to talk some individual player performances and studs and duds here, and that's how we'll close out today's show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is sponsored by our friends over at DoorDash. Moms are a gift, so give her the best this Mother's Day. Get gifts as thoughtful as she is with DoorDash. Select from hundreds of expertly crafted bouquets to the best of tech to self-care essentials and more, delivered right to her door. Does your mom have a sweet tooth? Is she a tech enthusiast or a beauty connoisseur, or is she outdoorsy? No matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout wear, and more. Pair flowers with a gift card so she can celebrate any way she wants. If she's a bookworm, try a bookstore gift card. If she loves a good latte, get a gift card to her favorite coffee shop. You can't go wrong no matter what. Get thoughtful gifts she deserves with the convenience you need. Choose same-day delivery or schedule a week ahead for when flowers and gifts should arrive to her door with DoorDash. Shop with savings that would make her proud. With a Dash Pass membership, you'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduce service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass merchants that meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees, including service fee, apply. Terms apply. Get all your Mother's Day gifts all in one place and get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. All right, let's talk individual studs and duds from this one. Karl-Anthony Towns was great. We haven't talked about Cat really at all in this game, and he got very little love from some of the national folks. There were some comments about how good the Wolves defense was with Cat at center for the vast majority of it, and that's 100% true. Very little love from the TNT crew. I appreciated Shaq sticking up for him when Barkley was trying to say that the non-call should have been a charge. The one that Michael Malone, ran at Mark Davis about. And, to me, that was could have gone either way. Murray wasn't completely set, and he certainly threw himself backwards to try and draw the foul. So could see that one both ways. All that to say, Cat didn't get a lot of attention for dropping 27 and 12 and shooting 67% from the field, 10 of 15 shooting, 3 of 5 outside the arc. A little bit of foul trouble early in the game. Really mid-game, I guess. Ended up with only 4 fouls. Again, 27 and 12, couple of blocks, 1 assist, 1 steal, only 2 turnovers. Ball in his hands a lot. 15 field goal attempts overall. Like, just a really solid, strong, sound performance from Karl-Anthony Towns. Scored an identical 27 as Anthony Edwards. Those guys combined to score. They each scored Rudy Gobert's number. So a little hat tip there to Big Rudy. But combined for 52 points. I mean, heck, the Nuggets scored 80. Really strong Karl-Anthony Towns performance. He's just been so good in these playoffs. Just playing within himself. Shooting the ball. He hit a couple of big threes that kind of held the Nuggets at bay. I mean, it was hovering around 20 points, so it's not like this thing got to single digits or anywhere close, but he hit a couple of big threes when that lead was kind of right around 20 to just kind of be like, hey guys, no, we're going to keep this 20 plus point lead. And just been really solid. I mean, he had 20 points in the first game, 27 and 12 in this game. He had 28 and 10 in the clincher against Phoenix, 18 and 13 the game prior. Game 2 was the one that was a little bit closer, and he was in some early foul trouble, only played 24 minutes in that game. Game 1, he had 19, 7, and 4. So he's been really good in the playoffs overall. Really has only had the one game where it was both foul trouble. I mean, it was a game 3. He was in foul trouble again, but he had a really big quarter, I believe, against Phoenix. So this was actually the second most minutes he's played in 6 playoff games so far this year, because he was primarily not in foul trouble. But again, I go back to what he's been asked to do. He was asked to guard Kevin Durant for 4 games, and now he's been asked to guard Nikola Jokic for 4 games without Rudy Gobert behind him. And I know the Wolves brought some doubles, but man, Cat has been so good defensively. And he absolutely deserves a ton of credit for how he's playing in these playoffs. By the way, he's also not turning the ball over. He only has 10 total turnovers in 6 playoff games. So what is that? 1.7 turnovers per game. If Cat averages less than 2 turnovers per game, he's still averaging basically 20 and 10 for the playoffs, I believe, after this. If he's going to average 20 and 10 with less than 2 turnovers, and by the way, has shot 50% or better from 3 in every game except 1 in 5 of the 6 games so far, this has been a fantastic start to the playoffs for Karl-Anthony Towns. So he absolutely gets a stud. We talked a little bit about Ant. He still gets a stud, 27 and 7, 11 of 17 shooting is very nice. Got the line 7 times and was part of that impeccable perimeter defense for Minnesota. Really fantastic. McDaniels was great. You can make the argument for him being the 3rd stud. We talked about Slim already, but and also Naz for that matter. Do I give it to Naz? I'm going to go with Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Honorary for Naz. Both of those guys were incredible. Nickeil had 14 points, 6 rebounds for Nickeil Alexander-Walker, 5 of 9 shooting, 4 of 7 outside the arc, 3 blocks for Nickeil, 1 assist, only 1 turnover. We opened the whole first segment on the Wolves perimeter defense, and Nickeil to me was the best of the perimeter defenders. Was really, really good in this game and just was loving putting Jamal Murray in jail the entire game. Naz Reid also belongs in that same category. Awesome defensively. We talked about his multi-blocks within multiple blocks within the same possession on Joker. Had 4 blocks total for the game, 14 and 5 with 4 blocks, 5 of 14 shooting, a bit of a high volume night for Naz, but 4 of 8 outside the arc. And, was really active in the paint around the rim on both ends of the floor, was a huge part of Minnesota's 18-points of the paint advantage. A strong game from Naz Reid. It was a big part of this Wolves switchable defense. I mentioned this in the first segment, but the Wolves were able to switch. They could switch whenever they wanted. And with the number of pick and rolls that the Nuggets try and run, that's a really viable strategy. I know Chris Finch would prefer not to switch, but the Wolves have the personnel that they can switch almost anything against almost anyone on the floor for this team. That maybe gets a little trickier depending on the opponent. Certainly would be against, say, the Celtics. It's not against Denver. You can handle that. I mean, Aaron Gordon tried to take, who did he try to take off the dribble? Was it Alexander Walker? And I just audibly laughed when that happened. And of course it ended with the brick from Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon, I said this earlier, I guess he made his first 5 shots, was miserable after that. And for whatever reason, kept thinking he could take guys off the dribble and then ended up shooting contested mid-range jumpers. And it just didn't work out for him. The Wolves can switch almost anything if they want to. And this is without Rudy protecting the basket. Just an incredible defensive performance across the board. I don't really have any duds for this game. Monte Morris, missed 3 3-pointers, had a couple of ill-advised ones. He had the one that he bricked right before halftime, or maybe it was the end of the third quarter. It was the end of the third quarter that led to a Nuggets dunk on the other end. And he would have been better off just not shooting that shot. I felt with him in a Wolves uniform, like he's never had his legs underneath him shooting threes. And I know he shot it okay in the regular season in a Wolves uniform, but just didn't seem all that comfortable. And again, he apparently sprained his finger toward the end of the game. Wolves don't play till Friday, so we'll see. But Jordan McLaughlin, I don't, other than being a little smaller, I think he can provide, similar production as Monte Morris. So anyway, that's all we got for you today. There's 3 more shows now before Friday night's game, I should say. So plenty to talk about this week. We'll get into this a bit further. What could the Nuggets possibly do to adjust as we get into Friday? We'll talk a little bit more about that. There's a lot to get to. We'll drill down into playoff numbers so far. We maybe do some historical comparisons. That gets dangerous. We're still only 2 games into the series. So A lot to cover here in the next few days. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. The Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. I'll be back tomorrow with Wednesday's show. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.